The debris field stretched endlessly in every direction, twisted metal and shattered glass catching the light from a distant star. David Park maneuvered his salvage ship through the wreckage with practiced ease, his hands steady on the controls despite what he was seeing. This had been Research Station Nova 8 just 5 days ago. 3,000 people lived here. Now there was nothing but silence and destruction. His scanner beeped softly, highlighting the section he needed to reach. The Galactic Salvage Authority had hired him for this job because his ship was small and quiet. Big military vessels had tried to approach destroyed stations before. They never got close. The creature always came back. Everyone called it the Ravager. Some said it was a weapon from an ancient war that had gone rogue. Others believed it was a demon from another dimension. David had seen the footage like everyone else. A massive dragon-like being that traveled through the vacuum of space as easily as a fish through water. Crystalline scales that glowed with inner light, wings that seemed to fold reality itself, and breath weapons that could cut through station hulls like they were paper. 12 systems had reported attacks in the past 6 months. Orbital platforms destroyed, mining colonies evacuated, terraforming stations reduced to rubble. The Galactic Council had thrown everything at the creature. Warships, defense drones, even experimental weapons. Nothing worked. The dragon just kept appearing, destroying and vanishing back into deep space. David guided his ship toward the research section of the ruined station. The air had long since vented into space, leaving rooms frozen and empty. Bodies floated in some sections, and he tried not to look too closely. He had a job to do. Get in, retrieve the data cores, and get out before the creature returned. Simple. Quick. Dangerous enough that they were paying him a year's salary for 1 day's work. His ship docked against what remained of the laboratory module. David pulled on his suit and checked the seals twice. The station was unstable, and one wrong move could send whole sections spinning into him. He pushed through the airlock and into the dark corridors beyond. Emergency lights still functioned in some areas, casting everything in a red glow. David made his way to the main research lab, following the map on his wrist display. His boots clanged against the metal floor, the sound eerily loud in the emptiness. The research lab was mostly intact, protected by extra shielding that had somehow survived the attack. David found the computer banks and began downloading their contents to his portable drive. While the data transferred, he glanced at the screens around him. Research notes, energy readings, diagrams of something that looked like a tear in space itself. His curiosity got the better of him. David started reading the most recent logs. The scientist here had been studying dimensional rifts, trying to harness energy from parallel spaces. They had opened something 3 months ago, an experiment that had gone wrong. The notes mentioned containment failures and something escaping into normal space. Parasitic entities that existed partially out of phase with reality. The download finished with a soft chime. David was about to disconnect when his ship's warning system blared through his helmet radio. Proximity alert. Something massive was approaching through the debris field. He ran. The corridors blurred past as he sprinted back to his ship. His heart hammered in his chest. The whole point was to be gone before the creature returned. David threw himself through the airlock and slammed the controls to seal it behind him. Through his viewport, he saw it. The dragon emerged from behind a section of broken station, and it was even larger than the footage suggested. Easily 200 meters long, with scales that looked like they were carved from living crystal. Each one caught and refracted light in impossible ways. The wings were folded close to its body, but even so they seemed to exist in more dimensions than David could properly see. He powered down everything except life support. His ship went dark and quiet, just another piece of debris among thousands. David held his breath as the creature moved closer. It was searching for something, moving wreckage aside with claws the size of his entire vessel. Then he saw something that made him freeze. The dragon's scales were damaged. Deep cracks ran through several of them, and a sickly purple light leaked from the wounds. Its movements were not aggressive or predatory. They were pained, desperate. The creature shifted a large piece of station hull, and David heard something through his ship's external sensors. A sound that might have been a cry of anguish. The dragon was suffering. Whatever it was looking for among the ruins, it needed badly. David watched as the creature tore apart sections of the station with increasingly frantic motions. This was not destruction for its own sake. This was not the behavior of a mindless monster. This was the behavior of something in terrible pain, searching for relief. David looked down at his downloaded data. Research on dimensional parasites, studies on crystalline life forms, medical protocols that had never been completed. The pieces came together in his mind like a puzzle he had not known he was solving. The dragon was not attacking stations. It was looking for help, and no one in the galaxy had stopped to realize it because they were all too afraid. Everyone saw a destroyer. David Park, failed xenobiology student turned salvage operator, saw a patient that no one would treat. He reached for his communications array and hesitated. The smart thing was to power up his engines and run while the creature was distracted. Get the data back to the authority, collect his payment, and forget he ever saw this. The safe thing. The sane thing. David's finger hovered over the power button. Through the viewport, the dragon shifted more debris, and another cry of pain echoed through space. He thought about the 3,000 people who had died here. He thought about the 12 systems living in fear. He thought about doing the right thing instead of the safe thing. He pressed the communications button instead. Broadcasting to the creature felt insane even as David did it. He cycled through every frequency his communication system could produce, sending the same message on all of them. No words, just data. Images from the research files showing the parasitic entities. Diagrams of crystalline structures being invaded by phase-shifted organisms. Medical scans showing the kind of damage they caused. The dragon stopped moving. Its massive head turned slowly toward David's small ship, and for the first time he got a clear look at its eyes. They were ancient beyond measure, filled with intelligence that made him feel like an insect being examined by a scientist. But there was something else there too. Pain, exhaustion, and perhaps the faintest hint of hope. David kept broadcasting. He pulled up more files, showing treatment protocols the researchers had been developing before the station was destroyed. He had no idea if the creature could understand human data formats, but he had to try. His hands trembled as he worked the controls. The dragon moved closer. Each motion was careful, almost gentle despite the creature's enormous size. David could see the wounds more clearly now. The cracks in its scales went deep, and that purple light pulsed with a rhythm that seemed wrong somehow. Like a heartbeat that was out of sync with itself. He deployed his medical scanner drone. It was meant for checking salvage workers after accidents. Nothing like sophisticated enough for what he was attempting. But it was all he had. David sent it out through the airlock, programming it to approach slowly and broadcast peaceful intentions with every sensor type it possessed. The dragon watched the tiny drone fly toward it. One massive eye tracked its movement. David expected the creature to destroy it with a casual swipe or a burst of its energy breath. Instead, it remained perfectly still, waiting, trusting. The drone completed its scan and sent the data back to David's ship. What he saw made his stomach drop. Dozens of the parasitic entities were embedded throughout the dragon's body. They were feeding on its natural energy production, draining it slowly. The medical AI estimated the creature had weeks left to live at most. Maybe less if the parasites continued to multiply. David opened his cargo bay and used the ship's external manipulators to gesture. He had no idea if the dragon understood body language, but he tried anyway. Sweeping motions meant to convey help and cooperation. He pointed at the parasites on his screen, then at the dragon, then made what he hoped looked like a removing motion. The creature shifted its enormous bulk. It moved through the debris field until it was floating directly in front of David's ship, close enough that he could have reached out and touched its scales if not for the hull between them. The dragon extended one wing slightly and held it there. An offering. Permission to examine. David suited up again and jetted out of his ship on his maneuvering pack. This close, the dragon was overwhelming. Every scale was the size of a door panel, and he could feel the heat radiating from its body even through the vacuum of space. The creature was generating enormous amounts of energy just by existing. He landed on the extended wing and attached his safety line. The surface beneath him hummed with power. Up close, he could see how the parasites had embedded themselves. They were slightly out of phase with normal reality, existing in multiple dimensions at once. That was why they were so hard to remove. Any tool that could reach them would have to operate across dimensional boundaries. David ran his handheld scanner over the nearest parasite. The device struggled to get a clear reading, flickering between different energy states. But it gave him enough information to understand the problem. The parasites were anchored to the dragon's crystalline structure at a quantum level. Removing them would require specialized medical equipment that only existed on advanced stations. The kind of stations the dragon had been destroying. He jetted back to his ship and pulled up a star map. The nearest medical facility was Refuge 3, a human-run station about 3 days away at his ship's best speed. David began recording a message to send ahead. He explained what he had found, what he believed was happening, and what he needed. He had no authority to make such a request. He was a salvage operator, not a diplomat. But he sent it anyway. Then came the hard part. David had to convince the dragon to come with him, to trust him completely for a 3-day journey to a station full of the very beings it had been terrifying for months. He had no shared language, no guarantee he would be understood, and no backup plan. He went back outside and approached the dragon again. This time he brought up holographic displays from his wrist computer, a map showing their current position and Refuge 3, images of medical equipment, diagrams showing the parasites being removed. He repeated the sequence over and over, trying to make his meaning clear through context and repetition. The dragon watched with those impossibly old eyes. David kept explaining, even knowing his words were meaningless. He talked about trust and help and working together. He described humanity's history of protecting endangered creatures instead of destroying them. He promised he would not abandon this being to die in pain and fear. Something changed in the dragon's posture. It dimmed the light coming from its scales, reducing its natural energy signature to almost nothing. David recognized the gesture for what it was: vulnerability. The creature was making itself as non-threatening as possible. It was saying yes. David returned to his ship with hands that would not stop shaking. He plotted a course for Refuge 3 and sent another urgent message ahead. A human salvage operator and the most feared creature in the galaxy were about to arrive at their doorstep. He hoped someone there had the courage to let them approach. The dragon followed his ship as he began to move. It matched his pace exactly, staying close but not crowding him. David watched it through his sensors and felt the weight of what he was attempting settle over him. If this failed, he would probably die. If it succeeded, he might just change how the galaxy viewed the unknown. 3 days in space with a dying dragon gave David time to think about how his life had reached this point. He had studied xenobiology in university, dreaming of making first contact with new species. Then his family lost everything in a bad investment, and he dropped out to work salvage and pay their debts. Now here he was, potentially making the most important discovery in galactic history while flying a ship held together with repairs and hope. The dragon stayed close during the journey. David found himself talking to it through the external speakers, even knowing it probably understood nothing. He talked about Earth and humanity's long road to the stars. He described the extinct species humans had tried and failed to save, and the ones they had protected successfully. He played music through the ship's array and noticed the creature seemed to calm when certain frequencies played. On the second day, David's ship passed through a dense micrometeorite field. His shields could handle it, but the dragon was too large and weak to dodge effectively. Without thinking, David angled his ship to put his deflector array between the creature and the incoming debris. The tiny rocks pinged off his shields while the dragon glided through the protected space behind him. He swore he felt something brush against his mind then. Not words or even thoughts really, but a sense of gratitude so profound it brought tears to his eyes. The dragon understood what he had done. It knew he had put himself at risk to protect it. That night, unable to sleep, David researched everything humanity had ever recorded about ancient species. Most civilizations ignored their oldest mysteries, too focused on expansion and technology to look backward. But humans were curious by nature. They cataloged and wondered about things that might never be explained. He found references to massive crystalline entities in the records of 17 different species across thousands of years. Always the same description, always appearing near dimensional anomalies or dangerous spatial phenomena, then disappearing once the danger passed. No attacks recorded in any of the historical accounts. Only in recent decades had the creature been labeled a threat. David compiled the evidence and sent it to Refuge 3 along with his position updates. Dr. Ilsa Vorn replied personally on the third day. She had convinced the station administrator to grant them approach clearance. It had taken every favor she had and a promise to evacuate the station if anything went wrong. They would have one chance at this. As Refuge 3 appeared on his sensors, David could see the massive medical bay doors already opening. The station looked small and fragile next to the dragon, like a toy next to a person. He guided them in slowly, broadcasting constant updates about their peaceful intentions. The dragon moved with obvious pain now. 3 days without attacking its parasites had allowed them to spread further. Its scales had lost some of their glow and its movements were sluggish. They needed to begin treatment immediately, or there would be nothing left to save. Dr. Vorn met them in the medical bay with a team of specialists. She was older than David expected, with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She approached the dragon without fear, carrying a medical scanner that was far more advanced than anything David owned. The dragon lowered its massive head to let her approach. She reached out slowly and placed one hand on its scales. David saw her close her eyes and concentrate. When she opened them again, she was smiling. "It's trying to communicate," she said over the radio. "The energy patterns it produces match ancient linguistic structures. Give me a few hours with the computers and I might be able to translate." While Dr. Vorn worked on communication, her medical team began more detailed scans. David stayed close to the dragon, continuing to talk to it like he had during their journey. The creature's eyes followed him wherever he moved. He got the sense it viewed him as the only familiar thing in a frightening situation. Dr. Vorn returned 4 hours later with a portable computer covered in modifications. She activated it, and the device began displaying patterns that matched the dragon's energy emissions. Slowly, incredibly, meaning began to emerge. The dragon's name was something that translated roughly as Guardian of the Deep Paths. It had existed for millions of years, traveling between star systems and maintaining dimensional stability. It was not the only one of its kind, but it was the only one in this galaxy. The others watched over distant regions of space, performing the same quiet service. The creature had detected the dimensional rift experiments at Research Station Nova 8 3 months ago. It tried to warn them, but no one understood its attempts at communication. When the experiment went wrong and created an uncontrolled rift, the Guardian had sealed it by forcing its own body into the tear. The action saved the entire sector from being consumed by phase space, but infected it with the parasites in the process. Every station it had approached afterward was an attempt to seek help. But fear drove the other species away before it could make them understand. The destruction was accidental, caused by its pain-driven thrashing or by its desperate attempts to reach medical facilities before being driven off by defensive fire. David listened to the translation with tears streaming down his face. The being they had all feared as a destroyer was actually their guardian. It had saved them all and been thanked with attacks and terror. No wonder it had nearly given up hope. Dr. Vorn put her hand on David's shoulder. "We can remove the parasites," she said, "but the process will take days and cause significant pain. It needs to remain conscious and cooperative the whole time. Can you stay with it?" David looked at the Guardian, at this ancient being that had placed its trust in him. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. The treatment began that same hour. The medical bay filled with specialized equipment over the next 6 hours. Dr. Vorn and her team assembled dimensional stabilizers around the Guardian, devices that could reach into phase space and interact with the parasites. The theory was sound, but no one had ever attempted this procedure before. They were inventing xenobiology as they went. David stayed beside the Guardian's head throughout the preparations. He kept talking, explaining what was happening and why each piece of equipment was necessary. The translation device helped now, converting his words into patterns the Guardian could understand. More importantly, it allowed the ancient being to speak back. "You are young," the Guardian communicated through pulses of energy the computer rendered into text. "Your species barely understands the dangers surrounding it. Yet you chose to help rather than flee. Why?" David thought about his answer carefully. "Because something hurt needs help. That is more important than being afraid. My people learned that lesson slowly and made many mistakes. But we learned it. Other species did not see a being in pain. They saw only a threat to eliminate. Then they were not really looking," David said. "Sometimes being young means you have not learned to be afraid of the wrong things yet." The Guardian's scales pulsed with colors David had not seen before. Dr. Vorn checked her instruments and smiled. "I think that was laughter," she said. Treatment began on the second day. The dimensional stabilizers created fields that forced the parasites into full phase with normal reality. Once locked in place, medical lasers could target them. But bringing them fully into this dimension caused the Guardian incredible pain. Each parasite fought against removal, sending waves of agony through the creature's nervous system. David held his position near the Guardian's head. When the pain became too much, he would press his gloved hand against the scales and talk. Stories from Earth, descriptions of oceans and mountains, memories of his grandmother teaching him to be gentle with injured animals, anything to give the Guardian something to focus on besides the suffering. News of the treatment spread through the galaxy faster than David expected. Within hours, representatives from a dozen species demanded answers. How could humans harbor the destroyer? Why was it not being destroyed or imprisoned? Several species threatened to withdraw from the Galactic Council if the Guardian was not dealt with harshly. Dr. Vorn fielded most of the communications, but she was a scientist, not a politician. On the third day, a formal delegation arrived from the council. They demanded to see the creature and determine for themselves whether this was truly the monster that had terrorized so many worlds. David met them at the airlock. 5 representatives from species the Guardian had supposedly attacked. They looked at him with suspicion and barely concealed anger. He led them to the medical bay where the Guardian lay restrained by medical fields and surrounded by equipment. "This is your destroyer," David said quietly. "Look at it." "Really look." The delegates approached cautiously. The Guardian was conscious but weak, most of its energy devoted to surviving the treatment. Its scales were dull, and the cracks had spread further before the parasites could be removed. Up close, there was no way to see it as anything but a suffering creature barely clinging to life. One delegate, a Felani named Hursk, reached out and touched the translation device. The Guardian's recent communications scrolled across the display. Explanations of its purpose, apologies for the fear it had caused, descriptions of the dimensional threats it had contained over millions of years. "It saved Research Station Nova 8 by sealing the rift," David said. "Everyone there died, but if the Guardian had not acted, the entire sector would have been consumed. It was not attacking them. It was protecting the rest of us." Another delegate pulled up tactical records from her own species' encounters with the Guardian. She reviewed them in silence, then looked up with shock in her expression. "Every time we engaged, it was near an unstable spatial anomaly. We thought it was creating them. But if it was actually sealing them, then we have been attacking our own defender," Hursk finished. "For months we have been trying to kill the one being working to keep us safe." The Guardian stirred slightly and managed to send a weak communication. "You did not know. I could not make you understand. The fault is not entirely yours." David felt anger rise in his chest. "No. The fault is everyone being too afraid to look past their assumptions. Too certain they understood everything to actually investigate. You almost killed a being that has protected this galaxy since before any of your species existed." The delegates looked uncomfortable, but none of them argued. They returned to the council and made their reports. David did not know what they said, but the threats to intervene stopped. Instead, ships began arriving with medical supplies and specialists. Species that had cowered in fear now sent their best minds to help. On the 5th day, the treatment reached a critical point. Half the parasites were gone, but the remaining ones had burrowed deeper in response. Dr. Vorn approached David with concern in her eyes. "We need to increase the intensity," she said, "but it might kill the Guardian. Its energy reserves are critically low. We can proceed slowly and hope it survives long enough for gradual removal. Or we can take the risk now while it still has some strength." David looked at the Guardian. "What do you want?" he asked through the translator. "I trust your judgment, young one. You have not failed me yet." The responsibility of that trust felt crushing. David closed his eyes and thought about everything at stake. "Increase the intensity," he said. "We save it now or not at all." The next 18 hours tested everyone's resolve. Twice the Guardian's energy signature dropped so low that alarms screamed through the medical bay. Twice David talked it back from the edge, begging it to hold on just a little longer. On the 6th day, Dr. Vorn extracted the final parasite and sealed it in a containment field. The Guardian's scales began to glow again. Recovery took another week. The Guardian's scales regenerated slowly, replacing the damaged crystal with new growth that shone brighter than before. Its energy signature strengthened daily, until sensors had trouble tracking the full extent of its power. Dr. Vorn estimated it would reach full health within a month, though the psychological scars would take longer to fade. The Galactic Council called a formal session to address what they were now calling the Guardian Incident. David received a summons to testify, along with Dr. Vorn and a dozen other witnesses. The Guardian itself would provide testimony through the translation technology that had become far more sophisticated over the past weeks. David had never been to the council chambers before. They orbited a neutral star system, a massive station designed to house representatives from every member species. The main chamber was built to accommodate beings of vastly different sizes and environmental needs. It looked more like a small city than a single room. He took his place at the human delegation section and waited. The chamber filled over the next hour. Representatives whispered among themselves and cast glances at David that ranged from curious to hostile. Some species had lost significant resources to what they still thought of as the Guardian's attacks. Others were simply afraid of what the creature represented. The session began with a review of the evidence. Holographic displays showed the destruction across 12 systems over 6 months. Ships destroyed, stations evacuated, resources lost. The tally was sobering. Then Dr. Vorn presented her findings. Video of the parasites being removed. Analysis of the Guardian's true purpose. Historical records showing its pattern of appearing near-dimensional threats. The most compelling evidence came from the research data David had salvaged from Nova 8. The original team had detected the dimensional rift growing out of control hours before the Guardian arrived. Their last transmission was a desperate warning that the rift would consume everything within 3 light years, unless someone could seal it. The Guardian had arrived and sealed it within minutes. The station was destroyed, but millions of lives were saved. A representative from the Korthian species stood to speak. Her world had lost an entire mining colony to what she called an unprovoked attack. How do we know this creature is truly a Guardian? It could simply be providing excuses after being captured. David wanted to respond, but the Guardian itself sent a communication that the translation system broadcast through the chamber. I offer proof through action, not words. Bring me to any dimensional anomaly in your territory. Watch what I do. Judge me by my deeds. The offer created chaos. Half the chamber erupted in argument about whether it was safe to allow the creature anywhere near populated space. The other half debated whether they could afford not to accept the offer. Finally, the council chair called for order and proposed a test. The Guardian would be escorted to a known dimensional instability in an unpopulated system. Observers from multiple species would document what happened. David volunteered to accompany the Guardian. Dr. Vorn immediately joined him, followed by representatives from 6 other species. They departed the next day aboard a council scientific vessel, with the Guardian following alongside. The unstable region was in the outer edge of Torvan space. A failed experiment 10 years ago had left a weak point in dimensional barriers that occasionally allowed energy and matter to leak through from other realities. The Torvan had been trying to seal it for years without success. The Guardian approached the anomaly while the observation ship maintained a safe distance. David watched through the viewports as the ancient being began to work. Its scales glowed with increasing intensity, and its wings unfolded in ways that hurt to look at directly. The Guardian was not just large in normal space. It extended into other dimensions, manipulating reality at a level no other species could match. It took 6 hours, but the Guardian sealed the rift completely. The space where the anomaly had flickered now showed only stable, normal dimensional readings. The Torvan representative on the observation ship made several calls back to her government. When she returned, she looked shaken. My people have been studying that instability for a decade, she said. We calculated it would take another century before we developed the technology to fix it properly. The Guardian accomplished it in hours. How many other problems has it solved that we never even detected? The observation ship returned to Council space with documentation of everything they had witnessed. The debate shifted dramatically after that. Some species still demanded restrictions on the Guardian, but others recognized the value of having such a protector. Humans, as the species that had initiated contact and treatment, found themselves at the center of negotiations. The final resolution took 3 more weeks to hammer out. The Guardian would be officially recognized as a protector of dimensional stability throughout Council space. It would have freedom of movement, but would coordinate with a newly established Office of Ancient Entity Relations. David was offered the position of First Director despite his complete lack of diplomatic experience. You understand the Guardian better than anyone, the council chair explained. "You looked past fear and saw a being in need. That perspective is what this office requires." David accepted on the condition that Dr. Vorn would serve as his chief scientific advisor, and that the office would include representatives from multiple species. If the point was to improve understanding between ancient beings and modern civilizations, humans alone could not do it. It needed to be a collective effort. The Guardian attended the official recognition ceremony in the council chambers. Its presence made many representatives nervous, but it remained peaceful and calm throughout the proceedings. When called upon to speak, it kept its communication brief. "I have watched civilizations rise and fall for longer than most of you can imagine. In all that time, I have seen few acts of courage match what David Park did in that debris field. He chose compassion when violence seemed safer. He offered help when fleeing was wiser. Your species are young, but this one showed me that youth can mean seeing clearly what age has forgotten. I am honored to work with you all." David felt his face flush as the entire chamber turned to look at him. He had gone from failed student to salvage operator to the most unlikely diplomat in galactic history. His grandmother would have laughed until she cried. 6 months passed in a blur of activity. David established the Office of Ancient Entity Relations with a small team of specialists from 9 different species. They traveled with the Guardian, documenting its work and serving as liaisons between the ancient being and modern galactic civilization. Every dimensional anomaly sealed, every spatial instability corrected was recorded and shared with the Council. The fear slowly transformed into respect. Species that had armed themselves against the Guardian now welcomed its presence. Children learned about it in schools, not as a monster but as a protector. Scientists studied its methods and began developing new theories about dimensional mechanics. The galaxy had gained not just a Guardian but a teacher. David found himself changed by the experience as well. He spent his days negotiating between species, interpreting the Guardian's communications and helping people understand concepts that most beings had never considered. His nights were spent aboard his old salvage ship, which he had refused to replace despite offers of newer vessels. It reminded him of where he started and why the work mattered. The Guardian seemed to appreciate the partnership as much as David did. Over time, their communication evolved beyond the translation devices. David learned to recognize patterns in the creature's energy emissions, understanding meaning before the computer could translate it. The Guardian, in turn, developed an almost protective attitude toward David and the team. One day, they received an urgent message from Torvin Space. The same species whose anomaly the Guardian had sealed now reported dangerous energy readings near their core systems. A research team had been conducting dimensional experiments based on data they recovered from other civilizations. Something had gone wrong. David and the Guardian arrived to find a rift forming in space, larger and more unstable than anything they had encountered before. The Torvin research station was still intact, but the rift was growing exponentially. Within hours it would be too large for even the Guardian to seal. The research director, a being named Hilra, met them with obvious fear and shame. "We thought we understood the principles. We studied the Guardian's methods and believed we could replicate them safely. We were wrong." David wanted to be angry, but the terror in Hilra's voice stopped him. "Can you shut down the experiment that created this?" "We tried. The rift is self-sustaining now. It will not stop growing until something seals it or it consumes this entire region of space." The Guardian was already moving into position, its scales beginning to glow with the intensity needed for dimensional work. But David could see something was different this time. The rift was fighting back, pulsing with energy that pushed against the Guardian's attempts to close it. "It is too strong," the Guardian communicated. "I can seal it, but I will need help to stabilize it first. The energy patterns must be dampened before I can close the dimensional tear." Hilra stepped forward. "My team created this. Tell us what to do." What followed was a remarkable display of cooperation. The Guardian explained the energy frequencies that needed to be countered. The Torvin scientists, despite their fear, worked frantically to reconfigure their equipment to produce matching counter frequencies. David coordinated between them, translating technical concepts and ensuring everyone understood their role. It took 3 hours of sustained effort. The Torvin team operated their modified equipment at the rift's edge while the Guardian worked to seal it from within. David's ship added its own modest power to the effort, dampening what frequencies it could. Slowly, impossibly, the rift began to shrink. When it finally sealed completely, everyone in the system felt the moment reality stabilized. The Guardian emerged from the closing rift with its scales scorched and dimmed, clearly exhausted. But it was satisfied. Another threat ended. Another disaster prevented. Hilra approached David afterward with tears streaming down her face. We almost destroyed our entire civilization through arrogance. We thought understanding something meant we could control it. The Guardian has been protecting us from our own ignorance for millions of years, and we never knew. Now you do, David said. The question is what you do with that knowledge. The Torvin became the strongest advocates for the Guardian's mission after that day. They established new protocols for dimensional research and offered their facilities to help train other species in recognizing dangerous anomalies. The near disaster became a turning point in how the galaxy approached ancient mysteries. David stood in the observation deck of his ship 2 months later, watching the Guardian work on a routine maintenance seal near human space. The ancient being moved with grace and power, its scales glowing healthy and bright. It had gained weight and seemed younger somehow, as if the partnership with the galactic community had revitalized it. Dr. Vorn joined him at the window. You changed the galaxy, you know. One act of kindness rippled outward further than anyone could have predicted. I just helped someone who needed it, David said. The Guardian is the one who changed things by being willing to trust after everything that happened. That trust had to start somewhere. It started with you. The Guardian finished its work and moved closer to David's ship. Through the communication system, it sent a message meant only for him. You gave me hope when I had lost it. You showed me that even after millions of years, I can still be surprised by the goodness of others. Thank you, David Park. Thank you for seeing me when everyone else looked away. David pressed his hand against the viewport as if he could touch the creature beyond. Thank you for letting me help. For teaching me that the scariest things are often just misunderstood things. For showing me that protection comes in forms we never expect. They traveled together into deeper space after that, the salvage operator and the ancient Guardian. Behind them, civilizations continued their work knowing they were protected. Ahead lay countless worlds and mysteries waiting to be understood. The galaxy felt larger and more wondrous than it had in millions of years, and in a debris field at the edge of explored space, a small salvage ship had once made the choice to help instead of flee. That choice had changed everything. Sometimes the biggest impacts come from the smallest acts of courage. Sometimes all it takes to heal an ancient wound is one person willing to extend kindness to something they do not fully understand. The Guardian and David disappeared into the stellar void together, partners in protecting a galaxy that had finally learned to see beyond its fear.